Thanks very much for joining us for this edition of the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter with my co-host today, Intech Logistics CEO Rick Legore. Hey, Rick, how you doing?
Doing great. Glad to be back.
And today we are talking about digitization and standards in the freight space with another person who was at IANA a couple of weeks back as we record this. And that is the NMFTA's Vice President of Operations, Keith Peterson. Keith, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And so the NMFTA, for those who don't know, the National Motor Freight Traffic Association, heavily involved in the standard space and all of that. We'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. But first, as we like to do with all of our guests, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in freight, and kind of an interesting one from where you started to where you are now.
Oh, sure. So, I generally tell people that I've spent a lifetime in the transportation business because, and my wife will kill me for telling this story, but some of my earliest memories are actually of truck yards, and still the smell of diesel fuel on a cool morning in a truck yard is something that still kind of really brings me back. But grew up around trucks and actually worked my way through school at a trucking company in Spokane, Washington. When I was done there, my father happened to be one of the partners of this trucking company. And I said, okay, what's next? And he actually put me over the road for a year. So driving a reefer van and picking up and making deliveries really all over the United States here. After that, went into operations and at a couple of different companies, and eventually ended up working for Qualcomm, who at the time was installing telecommunications equipment in trucks. So, a lot of people may remember some of the big white domes that they started with and eventually moved on to cellular communications. So worked with a lot of large customers of Qualcomm, Schneider, Extralease, working with them, trying to improve how they use that information that they're getting from us within their systems. And eventually ended up heading up the professional services group at Omnitrax, which is what Qualcomm eventually became. So, and then from there, I came to NMFTA here and to try to help out with classification and digitalization.
Yeah, so that gives you a good perspective on the whole thing as you're working in your current position as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, it really does. I've done everything from unloading boxes and repalletizing at different companies where I made deliveries to actually working within operations, trying to make sure that we could come, there were times where I'd come in, we'd be 100 loads overbooked and have to figure out how to at least get them picked up, if not moving right away here, all the way to working on implementation and trying to get new customers or even current customers that wanted to buy something new implemented through really complicated professional service engagements that included integration with APIs and working our way through those.
Great. So tell us a little bit more about what NMFTA does. I know there's a lot of a focus with LTL, but there's standards kind of all over the place as well. So give us a sort of 10,000 foot view of NMFTA.
Sure. So the NMFTA at its core is really a standard setting organization. For a long time, we've handled the classification of LTL freight. And without going too much into detail of that, it's all about determining how to properly rate for the space taken up on a trailer of an LTL carrier, right? But beyond that, we also have really gotten involved in cybersecurity as well here, and making sure that there are standards out there that carriers can use when it comes to cybersecurity. In fact, we've got an upcoming conference this month here that it'll be, I believe, our third conference on cybersecurity, and it's really getting well attended here. And then, of course, the Digital Standards Development Council, which really started about 3 years ago. But we're working to grow that, and we'll be talking more about that here soon as well here.
Yeah, I know you've written a lot of material on our site over the years with referencing NMFTA standards with LTL in particular, but
there's a lot there's a lot that goes on there. I mean, it's space, density, value of product. Yes, there's a bunch. And hey, we just interacted with your company yesterday. We re-upped or renewed, I should say, our SCAT code. So there's a little bit of everything that you guys are in. So I'm really interested in the digitalization. I missed your segment that you had in Long Beach, and Kevin was talking a little bit about it. So can you jump into that, kind of where it started? Why, I mean, you said it started 3 years ago. So it started 3 years ago. What kind of got everyone together, and kind of let's get some background on it before we start jumping into the details that Kevin said was, well, Rick, there's a lot here.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a definite movement to have a standardized API for the bill of lading. And for anybody that doesn't know, the bill of lading is really that contracted carriage when it comes to the LTL carriers. That's how everything gets started all the way through to the invoice here. And while there were many people using APIs for bill lading, each one of these engagements, these ProServe engagements, ended up being really complicated because there's all kinds of different ones, terms, different ways to do it, different requirements. And so it really started with carriers, TMS providers getting together, 3PLs getting together and going, hey, we need a standard API that people can use so that we can make these engagements that much easier and quicker, and really just a lot more efficient to get connected to each other, so that we can get rid of these paper bill of ladings, really, in the end here. So about 3 years ago, right, NMFTA took over that effort here and really pulled together the Digital LTL Council. And it includes carriers, 3PLs, shippers, and TMS providers as well, because we wanted to get a good overall rounded view to make sure that we were covering all the pieces that really needed to be in this standard here. So we've already released a couple versions of that. And what they also did while they were together here, and they developed a roadmap. Here's some other APIs that we thought would really be good to have here as well here. And that includes everything from appointment scheduling, pickup requests, that's the appointment scheduling, preliminary freight charges, in-transit visibility, invoicing, giving quotes for rates, cargo claims, and document retrieval. So they put together kind of that complete logistics process, only, okay, let's keep going and let's standardize these APIs for everybody to use here. So that's how they got started here. So I would say within the lab, and we were going along very well. We've got 3 of those actually released out to the public and available for everybody to use. And we have another one coming here before the end of the year here as well, which is in-transit visibility. About a year ago, we started talking to some representatives from the full truckload industry as well here, because they saw what we were doing with digital LTL and thought, that would be really good here. For full truckload as well. In fact, we'd like to work with you guys because we think there's a lot of interchangeability there between what you guys are doing. So really, almost to the date, a year ago, we started a full truckload council, and we followed that same program: carriers, shippers, 3PLs, and TMSs as well here. And we even have a freight payment system on the full truckload council as well, because they saw the same value in having these standard APIs. In fact, they had already started on their own, the SSC, which we've started managing, the Scheduling Standards Consortium, where they had created a scheduling API standard of themselves here. And so they brought that over, and now we started managing that standard as well here.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, the paper to digital piece. I mean, we've just I've been around the industry now for a few years myself, and just even in those few years, a lot of things had already gone pretty digital, but there are still a lot of holdouts in terms of the old-fashioned paper side of things. So how has that been able to evolve just, in those years as you've been focusing on getting these digital standards?
Sure. So, when it comes to paper versus digital, right? And you automatically think of the EBOL because that's an important document. And, it can be called different things to different people, but it's talking about what's on this shipment and where it needs to go and everything. And it is that everybody agrees that paperless is the way we need to go here, right? Because even down to the drivers, for years now, they've been having this paperless cab development here from several different providers here. So it is definitely headed that way here, but it's a lot more difficult than you think to get there. But this EBOL is really that first step in that path here as well. So it's going to get there. We have a lot of large partners on the council. So if you think of many of the large LTL carriers as well as large 3PLs and TMSs. So it is going to get there. It's just getting all the different processes in place to accept that that digital copy of that, for instance, bill of lading, and actually get it all the way through to the invoice here. So I hope that answers your question there.
Yeah, that part that get it to the actual invoice and final payment. That's where I see a lot of folks holding out because they want that paper. This is my personal opinion. They want to see that piece of paper because sometimes it's difficult to get it from the driver, and it gives them an opportunity to slow payment or slow pay particular invoices because there's far more in terms of transactions that we process that are electronic today. So EDI, but there's still that holdout that I want to have that piece of paper. I want to see that signed document, and that's a big hurdle for the final. I don't know what percentage is left, but there's still a big percentage that they want to see and touch that piece of paper and move on and move forward with that. So where have you gotten? Where are we going with that? Because I know a lot of people would love to see that disappear.
So it's funny when you talk about that. A lot of people do want to see the paper disappear, but when it comes down to it, just seeing that document that may have been used within the shipment, and looking long term, right? We're kind of covering it both ways here. We're wanting to be completely paperless, of course, here, so that can just flow throughout the system and get to payment. But we're also kind of planning for the more near term and people not being ready for that, but still being able to call up electronic copies of that. So both councils actually have documentation API standards that they're working through currently, where really, if you think about it, the carrier has copies of these documents, and instead of making sure that it gets all the way through, being able to call up the images and get them easily that way here as well. So reach out and connect to the carrier and get those images, or even looking at it more from the other way, being able to subscribe, to receive the images and just get them pushed to them automatically here. So it's going to be a process to get all the way through to full paperless, but even just being able to easily get the images needed in order to process that payment here is a big step as well, and putting a standard in place there.
Yeah, and I mean the standard piece of it is the other aspect where if you get everybody on that same page, they all agree to what this document is going to look like and how it's functioning. I would imagine that sort of gets through a sort of barrier to entry in the first place.
You're exactly right. So a lot of the time spent making these connections, between companies, whether it be, from TMS providers or either from a carrier directly to a shipper, is spent determining the requirements and building out that API and making sure that, checking on the errors that may come at first, so on and so forth here. So just taking the documentation API, for example, here, and I already kind of mentioned, being able to either subscribe or just easily call up that API and get the documents back that are needed. So, but you have to think through what's needed in that, right? You need the bill of lading number or some type of identifier, right? Maybe a date here, but what format is that date in? And you can spend so much time working on those things, and that's what takes so much time in these pro-serve engagements here. But if you have a standard and the carrier goes, well, I just work on the DSDC documentation standard, everybody can go get it. We make it open to the public so that you can go get it and develop to it. And that really speeds up the process as well here for the companies to make that connection.
So you're 3 years in. Are you happy with where the adoption is? As you mentioned, you're getting a lot of connections made, and what's your sort of longer term goal in terms of when this is really fully on board?
Sure. So, a lot of the times I feel like it's, you're pushing a stone up a hill, and eventually we're going to get to the top and you're going to start rolling downhill. So what's important is that we get more and more people using it. And it's going to start with the carriers. The carriers have to make this available as well so that TMSs can connect to it, so that shippers can connect to it, 3PLs as well. But the more people we get going on these, the more adoption it'll drive here. So somebody like C.H. Robinson's been a big supporter of EBOL, and they just continue to grow how many people are using it within their system. So C.H. Robinson, Worldwide Express has started using it. Of course, Old Dominion, Estes, many of the LTL carriers that have been involved in it have begun using it as well here. And the adoption just continues to grow because as they get more shippers or more connections to it, that's just what they start using going forward. So anytime, they may want to change a connection or make some changes with a current customer, they'll have them move over to this new standard here because, that's what makes sense. That's their path of the future. And even new customers, they'll have just go ahead and develop to that here. So it's going to take some time. Of course, we all know it takes time to work your way into the IT budget on any company here because there's always a ton of stuff to do these days. But it just makes sense. And in the long run, it's going to be a lot easier for everybody here.
Yeah, so we've used we've talked API a lot here, and I think maybe you just mentioned the IT budget. Some firms are bigger than others and have more of a capability to easily do that. But for somebody who's listening who maybe has a smaller firm, doesn't have necessarily a dedicated IT person, or they've heard API used a lot, but explain exactly what that is, and then how maybe somebody who's less tech savvy could get on board with something like this.
Sure. So an API, an application programming interface, is really just, it's a way to connect to another company and either ask or receive information or data from your partner, right? And you have to have an agreement in order to do that. So that requires credentials to be able to get into this other system and everything. And you both need to be working off that same API because, it's got to know what data to send back to you that was requested, basically. And it does take some work in order to put these things into place. So many TMSs already have them in place. These APIs, they're very used to working on them here. And it's really a matter of discussing with whoever you want to talk to about possible methods to put these into place here. one of the things about APIs that I find so appealing, and you had mentioned EDI before, right? And that typically comes up in these conversations because EDI has been around for a long time. It's a known standard. And I even remember, the days before EDI where, you'd have to enter in manually this information, right? And then EDI came along and wow, we can get all this automatically. And EDI is great. So I don't like people to think that I'm against EDI or anything like that. But the difference between EDI and API, and I'll kind of give an example. I heard this week, so it's stuck in my head, is, you may send over some load information through EDI, right? Say it's 3 pallets of product. But what if it turns into 4 or maybe 2 or something like that? To make that adjustment with API, it's just a very easy correction or call up, and say, hey, it's actually 2 pallets, basically. That's not something that's really easy to do with EDI, to send that information back here. And that gets to the core of what we're trying to get at, where it's an easily changeable interface so that as things do happen or requirements change, it's really easy to go in make these changes with APIs, whereas with EDI, it may not be as simple, right? EDI can be batched. API can happen at any time here. You can make that call. So it's just a lot quicker and a lot more agile when it comes to exchanging data here. So
a lot quicker and a lot cheaper once those APIs are established.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Rick. Yes, I agree.
Well, you mentioned the TMS piece too. A lot of these TMSs are maybe that's the gateway in for somebody who's using a TMS, but otherwise not so tech savvy.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Mostly if you don't have an IT staff, you're likely working through a TMS of some sort here, and it could be a matter of just making sure that they do work with the standards, right? And asking those questions as well. Yeah.
So we've talked about the LTL space and truckload getting involved, but you, as I mentioned, you spoke at IANA's Intermodal Expo, and we have intermodal in the name of the podcast too. So tell us how this dovetails with the intermodal space.
So So we've got LTL, we've got truckload, and intermodal is definitely something that we started looking at here because, well, honestly, JB Hunt is on the full truckload council here, and a big part of it as well here. And, they, of course, have a large intermodal group here. So as we look at these requirements, and part of this process, it's not just the council kind of deciding on a roadmap here, right? We put together workshops, that include product managers, technical writers, to write up PRDs. So you're thinking about the requirements and even get to the point where we're actually doing technical writing on these. So intermodal generally comes into these conversations because as we're thinking through the requirements, intermodal will have to come up in our minds. It's like, hey, is this okay for intermodal as well? Will we be able to exchange this information? Are we hitting the needs? Because it is so closely related here. Because there are many companies that do both LTL and truckload, but also intermodal as well. They have to either do intermodals themselves or work with an intermodal company as well here. So, we thought it was important to start talking to the intermodal groups as well about what we're doing in order to make sure that it's widely known here. So, rail is just as important part of transportation as actually the trucks are here. So, we think through what may be needed with intermodal as well for the requirements.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything's tied together, right? Yeah.
It is. Absolutely. Yeah.
And speaking of tied together, you mentioned that you talked about a lot of the carriers, but also you've got shippers, 3PLs involved. How important is it to get that buy-in from everybody there?
It's really important. We felt that we had to make sure that we had all points really represented here so that as we're thinking through these requirements, it's not just here's what the carrier needs, right? Here's what the 3PL needs. It's got to be, we've got to be looking at it from the viewpoint, here's what the industry needs. Because shippers have just as big a part in it as the carriers do, right? The shippers want their freight delivered correctly, on time, right, and in good condition, of course. And the carriers want to be able to do that and get paid as quickly as possible. And the 3PLs need to have all that information as well so that they can get it to the right people here as they're doing their work. So it is so important that we have representation from across the industry in order to make sure we are hitting the correct points when we think through these requirements here.
So another big topic out there is fraud. That documentation and fraud that sort of relates to each other quite a bit, and especially if there's something standardized that people can count on. But how does that come into the conversation with worries that people are having about that right now? Sure.
So, any time that you've got an exchange of information, fraud or theft or something like that there's definitely, it's a huge topic in our industry right now here. And some of the things that we started looking through is, a couple of things specifically for APIs is, how do we standardize authentication to make sure that nobody's reaching out and grabbing data when they shouldn't be, right? And making sure that that's safe as a number one. But even to the point where getting rid of paper really kind of lessens the risk of information getting out there, right? Keeping it more digital and making sure it's getting to the right places, I think really helps with fraud as well, because, people, it starts with just making sure that the right person's picking up the right trailer. I always kind of joke with people, we almost need to get, two-factor authentication just for a driver to go pick up a trailer, right? Say back up to the trailer. How do we send them a code or something like that to make sure that we can unlock this, right? But they get that information somehow, and so we have to make sure it's secure. And API is a very secure way of exchanging this information, this data about the load, what's on it, right? And where it may be here. So it is something we keep in mind constantly as we think through this, because we also do have an NMFTA, a cybersecurity contingent, as we talked about before here.
I've been waiting for you to get to that question because I have there's an example that
with bated breath.
Yeah, there was an example that I ran across when I was talking with somebody yesterday where on the fraud front, where the carrier had what they were supposed to have, the shipper had what they were supposed to have, and somehow a broker was able to slide in a document, and thankfully the driver was cognizant enough to look and say, well, I was originally dispatched to here, but all of a sudden I saw a document that came across, paper document, of course, that came across that was going to be this. So to be able to authenticate and then get it back actually into the navigation of the driver's trailer in some way or fashion to validate that for the carrier, for the shipper, and for the driver themselves. So again, I don't know how this other sheet of paper slipped in that looked like a bill of lading, but somehow it slipped in, and the guy was being directed to go to. Actually, it's very similar to the thing that was just out there with the tequila being stolen. Yeah. It was very similar. He was supposed to go to one part of California, but he started to go to Texas. So, and then he goes, "Hey, this is not right." So, the security, cybersecurity, and fraud somehow, some way, being able to authenticate that and get that into the paperless cab, that would be amazing.
Well, when you think through it, and that's like some Ocean's 11 type stuff there, right?
Yes,
being able to flip in a sheet of paper, and thank goodness the driver really thought about it and said, this doesn't look right at all. So, but when you really think it through here, and I was talking before about our roadmap, right? And it includes things like in transit updates here. So And that can include positioning, right? And people can even ask, the shipper can notice that, hey, that's supposed to go to California. Why is that person heading east, from, and going through Oklahoma right now?
Right.
So, I mean, there are definitely a lot of advantages to this. You'd rather head that off, number one here. It's going to be well beyond APIs. It's going to be making sure people are asking questions like that driver did when something like that comes up, right? Some type of piece of paper on that here. So it's going to take much beyond APIs, but we're trying to do our part with it as well here. So.
Well, and if there gets to that point where everything is standardized and everybody knows like this is the way we always do it, then some random sheet of paper coming in will always raise an alarm.
Yeah. You're telling me I need to go to Texas. My device is still telling me California. So that this can't be right. You're exactly right. So
So yeah, the cybersecurity piece is big as well, because one reason why some people do cling to the paper side is sort of a distrust of, the digital piece is not as secure. Somebody can get in and manipulate that way. So how do you address that cybersecurity concern with people?
Typically when it does come up, right, you remind them that, a piece of paper is really just that, and anybody can write on it. And to Rick's point, here this driver got a piece of paper, and and it told him to go to a different place. So it could be anything, and any clerk or anybody like that could slip that in there in some way, shape, or form. Or it could be they're picking up a trailer and pick up the documents out of the document holder here. So you've got to have one version of the truth here and make sure everybody knows it here. And by doing it through API, it goes straight from one system to another here, and any kind of updates are done automatically as well here, right? So if you really did update the location where the shipment's going here, that should be sent over automatically by API. And the driver's device eventually will get that update as well as a notice saying, hey, your delivery has changed. It's now this. And that process and making it a standard here is what really drives to the core of cybersecurity, and making sure that, the driver knows where the load should go and knows what's happening, or even a different trailer number, for instance, here. So that's really what we can do when it comes to cybersecurity.
Well, and cybersecurity has, supply chain is a freight term. Supply chain can also be a cybersecurity term. And that particular issue in cybersecurity is when, a bunch of companies are working together on a project, maybe integrated in some way. They all kind of need to have a sort of standardized security setup to make sure that there's no weak link there. So when you're looking at cybersecurity in the freight space, when there are obviously multiple parties involved, how do you encourage that behavior to make sure that everybody is taking care of all their data and all of their information?
So part of these APIs when it comes to this, and remember that it's all about being able to exchange data, right? So, but part of the APIs is, number one, authentication. So you have to be able to converse with that system. And we make our authentication standard on each of these APIs here. And it does require username, password, right? The right credentials, even a key to get in there. So you need to have the right credentials in order to exchange this information. But beyond that, obviously you need to have the right information so it knows where the data is supposed to go or where you're supposed to get it from. So they're going to need much more than credentials. They're going to need to know the load number or some type of identifier in order to make sure that any kind of updates are done there. So that again, that's how we're attacking the cybersecurity, at least from the DSDC.
Mm-hmm. So overall, when you encourage, the value of cybersecurity for firms in the freight industry. You mentioned the conference coming up, and it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month too in October as we record this. So what are some kind of key tips that you offer to the folks in the industry? Some things that they should be thinking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, number one, we encourage education for cybersecurity, and it's not just to the office staff, because everybody has to go through the education. Anybody that's dealing with cybersecurity, you have to go through the education of things. But it's not just to the office staff. You have to educate the drivers as well, because now they all have devices beyond what the company provides here within their trucks, whether it be computers, mobile devices, whatever. So you need to educate drivers to be aware of not just cybersecurity from their devices, but also the more personal ones as well. So people coming up asking what you're hauling, right? Asking to take a look in the trailer. I'm joking on that, so that rarely happens. But the more physical forms as well here. So we really advocate for heavy education and making it available. Making sure that the drivers know as well here. And beyond that, for the carriers, and is just really starting to outline not just their education plan, but what do you do in the event of a cybersecurity event, and what kind of backups do you have, and what's your reaction to it here? Because as much as we want to make sure nothing like that happens, you should be prepared as well in order to react to a situation like that here. And it might not even be within your own system. It could be an outage of a data center or something like that that's causing a widespread outage, right? So how do you react to that? How does everybody know who to call and how to get information at that point? So it's really going through those steps, making sure you have a plan in place well beyond education as well here. So.
Well, the example Rick just gave is one reason to have that education component. I mean, the other issue that we see a lot with broker fraud these days is like a phishing type situation where, I mean, Rick, you've mentioned this before. The email is slightly askew, double checking a website, all those types of things. That all ties together.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think we all get those emails fairly common anymore. And I'll be the first to admit I've almost kind of thought, whoa, wait a minute here, right? Some of them can really get you right away, but it's important for people to take a second and just take a breath and go, okay, really, what is this here? And then they'll start thinking. And I see more and more people doing that. That's become so common, and not just email, text as well, right? You're always getting texts from people. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell folks how they can learn more about the council, NMFTA, and the conference as well.
Yeah. So if you go to nmfta.org, so www.nmfta.org, you can actually go and see really everything that they do. So we've got it set up so that you can just click on any of those particular areas. The DSDC, our cyber group, it's got our events listed on there, and that's where you'd be able to go find out about the conference. Classification, SCAC, you had mentioned SCAC on that as well. So you can find everything there, as well as links to sign up just to even get updates on them. So you could go into DSDC and go ahead and sign in and start signing up for updates on what we're doing with the DSDC there as well. Same thing with cyber, same thing with classification. So, it's important to understand that we're an industry organization. So we really like to hear back from the industry, whether it be with classification changes and getting feedback on that, or even getting people involved with the DSDC and cybersecurity here. So we love to hear from people, and not just LTL, full truckload. We're really, we love to hear from the entire industry as a whole. Shippers, 3PLs, intermodal, of course, and making sure we're covering all the areas there. So.
Great, Keith. Thanks very much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The digital adoption thing is something that's always out there, and then there's levels of digital adoption. There's Excel, there's Word, and then there's the idea of actually a standardized digital footprint there that everyone can kind of get on the same page, which is kind of funny to talk about pages and digital at the same time. So this is where it's kind of going. Have you seen people, still holding out on not so much the standards thing?
Every day that we see people holding out. And as I said earlier in the conversation, in a lot of cases, it feels like they're holding out just to slow up payment, because the stuff does exist electronically. We can provide it to them electronically, the paper version of it electronically that they can have. But they still want that piece of paper to move things through. And we all know that if that shipment didn't deliver, there would be other conversations. People are looking for claims and all this other stuff in terms of trying to track it down. So we know the shipment delivered. So being able to pull this into the truckload market, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult, because he said they really wanted to go through the carriers. Well, on the LTL side, there's a lot fewer carriers than there are on the truckload side. And so it's going to take some time. So I like the suggestion that you had made in terms of going on to the TMSs and trying to drive that through that process. I think that would really be super helpful if we can get more TMSs to go that direction.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of great information on NMFTA's site. They do a lot in the industry. I know, going through the blogs and everything that you've written over the years, and that we put out all the time. There's a lot of references to those standards, especially with LTL, but now it's broadened quite a bit also. So thanks again to Keith for joining us on this episode to explain more about that. And thank you very much for joining us on this episode as well. Please do like, subscribe, follow, however you get the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. Drop us a comment, write a review, give us 5 stars. That's great too. And we really appreciate all of that. You can also email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com if you have other questions, and visit www.intechlogistics.com for more about the company. For Rick Lagore, I'm Kevin Baxter. Thanks again, and we'll be back soon with another episode.